Hello, this is a quick video to show you the January updates to the Brightspace VLE. It is the highlights that Chris Pagliari and I have selected. There are the full updates you can get by looking at the release notes, and we always encourage you to do that. And before I start, I'll just say if there are any of these updates that you have any questions or want to do some work on, or there's something you want to investigate, please feel free to contact Chris or I, and we'd be glad to explore those with you together. To start off, there have been some changes to the default interface, which means that the new experience will be set to on by default. So the assignment page, the quiz builder, and rubric builder pages are all set to the new experience, and the rubric grading experience is also set to on by default. You can see we've known this was coming for a long time, but Internet Explorer is no longer supported by the Brightspace VLE, and if you are using Internet Explorer and you try to log into the VLE, you get the message that you see on the right. Also, the Picture Widget, Picture Library widget, which was very popular years ago, has now been removed from the system widgets, so you can no longer add it to a page, but it is also no longer functional. So if you had a picture library widget that was still a widget that had been added to a page, it will no longer be functional. There have been some changes to the discussion assessments page, and again, it's changing to wording on buttons to make all of the tools have this consistent wording so that it's easier for the user to understand what they're doing on those pages. Previously, when you're in an assess topic, there was save and close, and cancel buttons, and those have been replaced with publish feedback and retract feedback to make them more consistent with the other tools in the VLE. Also, there used to be a column to indicate whether feedback was set to draft or published, and that has been replaced with a column that leaves a date for the feedback. If you are exporting grades from the VLE, they will come down as a CSV file, and you now have the option to sort that CSV file prior to exporting it or while you're exporting it according to some of the fields in the spreadsheet. So you can now sort that exported list by org-defined ID, username, last name, or first name. And you do that through a drop down that you can see from the picture on the right-hand side. And this new option gives you the order of preference for sorting, and that appears below the other export options that you had prior to this update. One of the exciting changes that I think will kind of resonate with educators is the changes to groups. If you are creating self-enrollment groups, previously, so let's say you wanted to set it up according to maximum number of participants per group, it used to be that you would create these groups and then they were locked in. So if you were creating groups that had 4 participants in it, you couldn't then go back in and change that number. Now, even after you've created a group, you can go back in and you can change the maximum number of participants for a subgroup. So I'll just show you what that looks like in motion. And it's sometimes easier to see these things by comparing it to what it used to be. So if you look, this is a pre-update, and we go to edit the category of a group that has been set up to have maximum number of participants per subgroup. And you can see that the information is there and the maximum number of users is set to 5, but you can't alter that. That is not something that can be edited after the fact. And now if you look at the January update, so this is a group that has been done after the January update, and you can see you now have an input text field there for maximum number of users, and you can change that value even after the groups have been created. Another change to groups has been for again, the self-enrollment groups, and you can set a start date. So you can say, okay, these groups open up at 9 o'clock on Monday, rather than them being available for self-enrollment as soon as you create those groups and make them available. So what that does is it lets the educators set up the groups and then set that start date, and they can notify the students, and then in theory everyone has the same access to enroll in the groups in which they want to belong. There's been a small change to the class list. If your class list stretches over multiple pages, so for example, if you're displaying 20 students or 20 participants per page, you won't be able to at a glance see all of your students at once. But with this update, you will be able to see the total number of users in your group. So That number that the arrow is pointing to at the very bottom of this screen shows you the total number of participants in the group or in the class. And so that is over all of the pages. So if you have 35 students, you'll see 35 there, even though you can only display 20 students at a time. I think the most significant update potentially for us is the connection that's been made between the achievements tool and the rubrics. So achievements, of course, we're using them for expectations. So when you see achievements tool in the release notes, it's referring to the expectations tool, and a lot of you have changed the name in your system preferences to say expectations. So what that means is expectations can now be linked to individual criteria on a rubric, so that when you are evaluating a criteria on a rubric, you are also simultaneously setting a level of achievement on an expectation, which is very cool. I'm editing a rubric here, and there's a button there that I can select to add any expectation that has been associated with the course. So I just selected one here. And you see it gets added. And let me just pause this for a second. So what it does is it overlays the level of achievement for the expectation on top of the rubric. And as long as the rubric has the same number of columns as the number of levels of achievement on your expectation, they'll just map 1-to-1. But let's say you had at provincial expectations, exceeding expectations, and kind of a not yet column. Then what you can do is you can move these markers. So these markers are kind of an overlay that goes on top of the rubric that give you the range of achievement. So you can actually drag these markers to set how many columns in your rubric represent a certain level of achievement in your expectation. So when you're creating it, you can set these, you can associate expectations with individual criteria, you can adjust the levels if you have to, and then when it comes time to evaluate them, when you evaluate the rubric, you also are evaluating the expectation. So now we're in the assignment tool, and we're at a student's work, and we're evaluating it. And you can see that I have a rubric associated with this assignment, and I have the expectations are also automatically added. So if I have those expectations associated with the rubric, they're added alongside the rubric, and you can see them over here on your screen. Here's the rubric, and here below, I'll expand that in a second, you'll be able to see the expectations that are associated with it. And then, so if I just do that, then you can see there's the expectation, and there are the levels of achievement. So now, when I'm at this rubric, if I select level 3 for achievement on this particular criteria, what it's going to do is it's going to suggest the level of achievement on the expectation. You can see there it's set to level 3. Another quality of life improvement has been to the Quick Eval tool. As an educator, I use the Quick Eval tool all the time. I think it's very, very handy. One of the things that can happen is there can be some bloat in there as you have items in the Quick Eval tool that you're not needing to evaluate at this time, or you have some that you're done with and you don't want to see them anymore. So the new update, the January update, lets you dismiss individual assignments in the Quick Eval tool. And you can dismiss them as in dismiss them forever. You don't want them to appear anymore in the Quick Eval tool, or you can have them go away for a time and then return at a later point in time. So if you just want to focus on the individual items that you're concerned with this week, you can use this dismiss tool to get rid of old items that you're never going to want to look at again, and items that are upcoming that you don't need to evaluate yet. You can dismiss those. There is also a way to recover them. So if you dismiss them and then want them back, you can do that as well. This is another one that I think will benefit from seeing it in action. So I'll just show you very quickly. This is the Quick Eval tool with one assignment. When I click on the ellipsis for more actions, there's a button for dismiss until, and I can dismiss for a specific date or forever. And when you do that, you can see you get the "You're all caught up" icon with a nice little kitty cat. And I'm embarrassed to say I have never seen this screen on the Quick Eval tool. And then we click on the ellipsis in the top right, and you can get all your dismissed activities, and you can just click the checkbox and restore them, and then they're back. So that's how you can manage your Quick Eval tool so that it's a little bit easier to keep track of what it is you're trying to evaluate. There's another integration of tools, and that is a closer connection between the quiz tool and the grade tool. So now, if you are adding comments to a grade item that is associated with a quiz, that feedback that you're putting in the grade tool will be synchronized with the quiz tool, so that if the student goes to the grade tool or goes to the quiz tool, they'll get the same feedback. So here we have this quiz that I've created, and I'll just show you under Edit and under Assessment. You can see I have this linked to a grade item called January Update Quiz. So that needs to happen. There has to be a connection between the quiz and obviously the grade item. So that's done here under the assessment in the quiz section. And if we go over to the grades, we can see here's our January Update Quiz grade item, and we can enter grades here. And you can change the feedback. And save and close. And I'll impersonate the student. And when I click on quizzes, I can see my feedback. And here is the comment that came from the grades item. Another update has been to rubrics. When you're creating rubrics at the org level, you now have the option to share that rubric with any of the other org units in your org. So you can add them to any courses you want. You can see there's a button there that says Add Org Units, and then you can see from the screen on the right, there's a bunch of checkboxes, and you can just check which courses you want to share this rubric with. And finally, there's been a character limit imposed on most of the fields in the personal information fields of user profiles, and that's set to still a very generous 4,000 characters. So that's a lot of my favorite movies that you can list in that field still. So still pretty generous. There have been a couple of updates that were more administrator focused, and I'll just talk about those now. One of them has to do with SCORM. The VLE and Brightspace has created a new SCORM engine that basically allows SCORM objects to be displayed in the content pane of the lessons interface. So previously, if you had a SCORM package that you had uploaded, you'd get a button there that says View Content or something similar. You click the button, it opens a new tab and shows you the content in the new tab. Apparently, this new SCORM engine will allow that content to be displayed directly in lessons. So the updates that they've done with regards to SCORM this month have been to link some of their tools to this new SCORM engine. So if you're importing content through course import, they're now sent, that's a typo, it should say they're now sent to the new SCORM engine. And also there have been so the packages from the LOR similarly are going to the new SCORM engine, and that any SCORM objects in the LOR can now be previewed. So just a quick word about SCORM. If anybody is actually using SCORM to upload their content and they had any questions or wanted to discuss that, I've done quite a bit of work with SCORM over the years in Brightspace, and I'd be interested to hear how you're doing it, and if you need any help or you want to explore some stuff together, that would be cool. There has been a change, so any configuration variables that end in brackets with the word org unit now have the option to have that permission cascaded down to all the child elements of that org unit. So the example that Chris Pagliari provided was that departments are set up and they have an org unit. And so let's say you wanted to do something like take the lessons interface and have it turned on for all of the courses in a particular department. Well, now instead of going to each individual course and turning on lessons, you can go to that course's department and just set it at the department level, and then use the button to have that permission cascade down to all the child elements of the department, which would turn it on in all the courses. And finally, there have been some new columns added to a couple of the data sets. So if this is relevant to you, you now have more data to play with. And so those are the January updates. Those are the kind of the highlights, as I said, that Chris and I have identified. But we encourage you to go to the full release notes and check them out, as there may be some small updates that will still have a significant impact on maybe one of your teachers or maybe your board for the way that you do use a particular tool. So those are the updates. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact either Chris or I, and we'd be glad to explore this stuff with you further. Thank you very much. Bye.